Good evening. For those of you who I have not yet met, my name is Melissa Giller. I'm the Director of Communications and Programs here at the Reagan Foundation. If I could ask you to please turn off your cell phones if you haven't already done so, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. So on this, the 94th anniversary of Flag Day, which commemorates the adoption of the flag of the United States in 1777, if I could ask you all to please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. As I sat down to write this introduction for our guest speaker tonight, I find myself at a loss for words. What words can you use for someone who has won almost every major journalist award throughout his career, including being a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, once from '94 and most recently from 2008, a three-time winner of the Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi Award for Excellence in Journalism, a Nationalist Journalist Award winner, and a Mencken Award winner for Best Editorial Cartoon. Michael Ramirez's commentary covers everything, from the economy and markets to politics and international affairs, and offers a unique perspective on today's issues. His editorial cartoons take a humorously insightful look at the world around us, making us laugh while informing us on the issues of the times. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and as former California Governor Pete Wilson has said about our speaker here, one Michael Ramirez cartoon is worth far more than 1,000 editorials. So instead of continuing on with a formal introduction, I thought I would allow President Reagan to do it. President Reagan called himself a confirmed doodler, and he likes to speak about the importance of editorial cartoons to himself. So I'm going to turn your attention to the screens here. These are a few excerpts from a 1987 speech to members of the American Association of Editorial Cartoonists.
It's a pleasure to welcome America's editorial cartoonists here to the White House this morning. I know cartoonists are an independent lot who often march to the beat of a different drummer. Of course, sometimes when I see the way some of you draw me, I wonder if it's just a different drummer you're marching to. Maybe it's the tune tones. As you know, this is the second time that we've had editorial cartoonists here during this term. Last May, I had some of you over for lunch. We're still looking for the missing silverware. And I'd like to know who drew the graffiti on the hall wall. I don't want you to erase it, I just want you to sign it. But cartoonists occupy seriously a special place in my heart. I like to draw cartoons and caricatures myself. So when I see a particularly good one in the newspapers, particularly one of myself, I want to throw a bouquet or something. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean that personally. After all, for me, politics is forgive and, as you may have heard, sometimes forget. Seriously, though, one thing that I and no politician will ever forget is the importance of the work that each of you does. Cartoons show American politics from a special angle. Irony, wit, satire, outrage, as well as occasionally sympathy and affection. These are the qualities that animate your work. And it's these special qualities captured in your illustrations that have become so much a part of our political culture from our country's very first days. Political cartoons have helped every one of us express our feelings about the great national events of our day. Yes, you are part of our national debate and our national experience. Your humor helps give America's political dialogue its characteristic way of humanity. And in doing that, you keep us here in Washington from taking ourselves too seriously, and I can't think of any greater service to national sanity than that. So this is why I've asked you here today to say thanks for all that you've meant to American life. Thanks for the laughs, and thanks for the groans, and thanks for the insights. Thanks also for what you'll mean in the years ahead. If someone were to ask what's the difference between the United States and the Soviet Union, I guess one answer would be that in the United States, editorial cartoonists can publish pictures lampooning Ronald Reagan, while in the Soviet Union, cartoonists must publish pictures lampooning Ronald Reagan. Yes, you're an integral part of our free society, and your vitality is a sign of the vitality of freedom itself.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Ramirez.
You know, it's funny because I was actually at that event. It was a meeting in the Oval Office and then in the Rose Garden. And believe me, after we departed, they adopted much tougher sanctions for security precautions to keep the rabble out of the White House. I didn't like the strip search that much, but I grew to enjoy it much later. I wanted to mention some people here that I love dearly. My mom's here, who's just the best mom in the world. And we're lucky to have Stan Freberg. Oops. Can I just take this off? Stan Freberg, who's a national treasure. Stan is here with Hunter, who's his equal, and another wonderful, wonderful person. The Weinsteins are here. I was telling my friend Jerry, who's the docent who got me to come here, about the incident in the White House. I was to have a great picture right after that Rose Garden meeting, where I had to run over to the circular front of the south side of the White House, because I'm always drawing it. And I ran out to the lawn to take pictures, and I've got this great picture of the Secret Service guy tackling me as I was taking the picture. You know, it was a real honor to be there at the White House, because Ronald Reagan is one of my favorite presidents. And, you know, if we could all adopt the things that he believed in, imagine what a great country that are finding our foundational roots. Ronald Reagan knew what direction to take America in, and he is sorely missed right now. There was this young man, and he was on trial, and the judge was chastising him. He said, young man, how can you justify such a terrible crime, such a heinous deed, killing a California condor? There are only 26 of them left in the wild. What could possibly have been going through your mind to allow you to do such a terrible, terrible thing? You know, they're endangered species. And he said, well, Your Honor, I was lost in the wilderness. I was camping, and I fell off this cliff, and I landed on a ledge, and I was stuck on this ledge for 7 days and 7 nights with no food and no water. And I guess I must have looked pretty bad, because as I laid there, this giant buzzard landed on top of me, started pecking at me. And so with the last ounce of strength in my body, I picked up a rock, I bashed him in the skull, and I ate him. It was a matter of sustenance. It was a matter of survival. And the judge said, well, you know, that's a pretty reasonable explanation. I just might let you off. Just out of curiosity, what did it taste like? And he said, well, it was kind of a cross between a bald eagle and a spotted owl. A story with a twist, an element of humor to capture your attention, and then the fatal blow. In essence, that's editorial cartooning. When people ask me what is an editorial cartoonist, I always say, well, we're a hybrid. We're a cross between Ted Koppel, Edward R. Murrow, and the Son of Sam. Editorial cartoons are about concept. The illustration is merely a vehicle to convey a point of view. We're here to protect and inform the public, to attack and repel those who do not share our long-term interests, to attract and compel the reader to arms in the battle against the complacent, the lethargic, the evildoers, the champions of the status quo, and the assorted predators of society. Basically, you could say I get paid to be obnoxious. It's the only other profession besides dentistry where you get paid to be obnoxious. Now, politicians would have you believe that they're paid to be obnoxious. They're not paid to be, they're just obnoxious. That's why we have editorial cartoonists. It's a profession about ideas. 95% of what I do is concept or pushing a particular point of view. We are the pit bulls of journalism, and we're trained to attack at the slightest provocation. We are the prosecution, pushing for a rapid conviction and an immediate execution. We are the defense, punching holes in the arguments raised against our cause. We are judge, we are jury. I'm not in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, so you can actually understand my rulings. We stand in judgment over the issues, and the sentence that we levy is swift and harsh. But in order to be judge and jury, one must read and research to digest the complex issues of the day and bring some semblance of order to them. So you could basically say, I'm the most boring person in the world. As my friend the Weinsteins can tell you, all I do is sit around and read and consume information. I start the day around 5:30 in the morning, watching the news at every half hour, trying to get a sense of what's being absorbed by the American consciousness. I read 4 papers a day. I read the LA Times, I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Some people say the truth lies somewhere between those 2 editorial pages. The truth lies in the pages of Investor's Business Daily. We have the best editorial page in the country, and you probably saw Matt back there. Make sure you pick up a subscription. You'll find what it's like to read a newspaper that delivers the truth without worrying about political correctness. It is the best editorial page in the country today. Now, I'm a political analyst. I'm a capitalist pig. Obviously, I'm pitching my newspaper. I'm a political wonk. I read everything I can get my hands on. As a contributor to the Weekly Standard, of course, I read the Weekly Standard. I read the National Review on the right. I read Mother Jones on the left. If I want a good laugh, sometimes I'll read The Nation. I think it's important to view issues on the broadest possible reference plane. In fact, I think if you firmly believe in any issue, I urge you to read the opposite. Most times it's merely going to reinforce your original beliefs, but on the rare occasion it might change your mind. And either way, I think you'll have a larger, more comprehensive view of the issue, and I think that's what's important, is to be informed. I believe it's important to understand all sides of an issue, and that entails knowing the contrary point of view. I'm a firm believer in the statement, know thine enemy. So, I'm boring. I spend my time gathering information. We process the information to draw a conclusion, to draw a cartoon, and hopefully to draw blood. Now, the media's job is to be the purveyor of fact, to point out the injustices of the world and to shine the hot spotlight of exposure to wound the perpetrators of those injustices with the truth. Editorial cartoonists, we go back and shoot the wounded. Now, I want to make a distinction here between objective news reporting and the subjective editorial page. I always find it funny when people call me up and they say, well, they don't call me Mr. Ramirez, but since we have a mixed audience, I won't tell you what they call me. But they say, you're way too opinionated. And I have to explain, well, that's why I'm on the opinion page. But I realize these days it's hard to distinguish between the two. The truth is, the mainstream media does an awful job. That's why people trust the media less than they do politicians, and we know how much they trust politicians. I think it's a factor in why circulation is going down. Obviously, there's a convergence of media, and people are relying on the web for information. But I think it's because of the media bias is turning people away from the written page. And why would anyone want to buy misinformation when it's readily available on the internet for free? So there is widespread manipulation going on in the mainstream media. I think they've been perpetrating a lot of myths, and I think it's time to get to the truth. So let me clear up some stuff. Let's start off with the Iraq War. This rush to war actually took 12 years and 17 UN resolutions. Resolution 687, the terms of surrender for Desert Storm outlined that they had found weapons of mass destruction, and they required Saddam to reveal all of the programs and show proof of destruction. Now, Resolution 1441 that followed that only required two things: overflights and unannounced inspections. Had he conformed to those two things, they would have lifted the sanctions completely. Now, if you go to the UN's own website, to the UNSCOM chronology, you'll find a decade-long chronology of events of finding evidence of weapons of mass destruction in all three categories: biological, chemical, and nuclear. Proof of programs, plans, materials seized. Now, this question of American unilateralism, there are over 50 nations that supported this war effort. This was a much larger coalition than of Operation Desert Storm. There are an additional 15 Arab nations that cooperated, but of course they couldn't tell the population that they were. Countries like Bahrain and Qatar, Saudi Arabia. So, anyone who tells you there are no weapons of mass destruction, well, they're either ignorant, they're uninformed, or they're lying, and it's propaganda. Now, let's go over the Bush economy. Bush inherited an economy that was 17 months in a manufacturing recession. Now, granted, I think his administration deserves some criticism, but let's highlight some of the things he did right. They inherited this economy that was 17 months in a manufacturing recession. 6 months later, they're hit by the devastating effect of 9/11. 3,000 lives lost, $1.6 trillion in negative impact on the economy. After that, we engaged in 2 wars. We won 2 wars. This may be the first time a U.S. president has defeated 2 tyrannical, despotic terrorist regimes, rogue regimes, and was not given any credit for it. Last December, we had the 6th Democratic election in regions that have never experienced democracy before. I don't know about you, but I don't think America should ever apologize for being for democracy. Make no mistake about it, the magnitude of change that will be reaped by even 1 seat of democracy in those regions will have a profound consequence of historical proportions and set those countries and their neighbors on a course toward freedom and democratic change. And that is good for the world, because democracies do not start wars. And let me make this clear. The tax cuts in 2001 and 2004, they complain about those tax cuts helping the rich. Those tax cuts, which actually raised taxes on the rich, brought in more federal revenue from the rich, 36% more for the first 5 to 6 years of the Bush administration. Because of that, we resulted in 3% growth and 5% unemployment. 5% sounds like a pretty good number right about now. What's amazing is they never mention that this economic collapse that we had, it was started by federal institutions, the GSEs, the government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who underwrote loans which guaranteed making leveraging loans to people who could not afford them a national enterprise. They nationalized profits, but they socialized the cost of their failures. I think that played the biggest role in causing this economic crisis. Now, according to a Bloomberg article this morning, it stated the cost of fixing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the mortgage companies that last year brought or guaranteed 3/4 of U.S. homes, this is a federal institution, will be at least $160 billion in the red, and that could grow to as much as $1 trillion after the biggest bailout in American history. If you notice, in this latest banking reform bill that Christopher Dodd is pitching, it doesn't even include reform for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Now, why is it? These entities continue to be insulated from reform. Why is that? Let's see, the largest recipients of political contributions from Fannie Mae and Freddie were, number 1, Senator Christopher Dodd. Number 2, Senator Barack Obama. And on the House side, it was Barney Frank. Is it a coincidence? I'll let you decide. But it'll be Thursday's cartoon. No, I'm just kidding. Now, I'm tired of this administration telling us this is the worst economy since the Great Depression. The economy is bad, no question about it. This administration would have believed that this is the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Well, let's compare. During the Great Depression, you had 25.7% unemployment, a little over 9.7% unemployment now. During the Great Depression, we had a negative 13.65% GDP. Now we have an anemic 1% growth of GDP. During the Great Depression, they didn't keep records back then, but the estimates were anywhere from 40 to 70% foreclosures. The worst case scenario I've heard so far is a little over 15% foreclosures at the worst possible outcome of this housing crisis. Is it comparable? I don't think so, but they would never let a crisis get away from enacting what they want. I think there are some worthy comparisons of how FDR took an economic downturn and turned it into a Great Depression compared to what they're doing now. The 1932 Revenue Act, which targeted the investment class and businesses with high taxes, which slowed the economy. In 1929, Smoot-Hawley, which impeded free trade. We've been trying to get free trade for Colombia, new deals with Korea, China. There's a threat of renegotiating the North American Free Trade Act. This huge federal expansion, which is something that I've never witnessed in my lifetime. This budget this year is $1.8 trillion. It has a deficit 4 times the size of the worst deficit-laden budget during George W. Bush's term. And it represents 13% of our GDP. Our huge federal deficit, the numbers came out a week and a half ago. We're now at $13.1 trillion. Let me put that into context for you. Our GDP last year was $13.2 trillion. We owe almost 98% of our GDP. That works out to about $47,000 for every man and woman and child. And the consequences of this are going to resonate not just for one generation, but 2 generations. Currently, without health care and cap and trade, our national debt is projected in 10 years to be around $20 to $28 trillion. Let me put that in perspective for you. If each one of you paid the debt back at a rate of about $1 a second, it would only take 670,000 years to pay it back. And this whole healthcare debate, which has just driven me crazy, the CBS's latest forecast just added another $115 billion to the cost of healthcare, which was supposedly budget neutral. The real cost is about $1.5 trillion. That's without the Medicare doctor fix, without this $500 billion in Medicare cost savings that we've never realized, that we've always been looking for but never found. The 47 million people insured, if you remember, during that debate, they started out at 47 million uninsured, but when somebody said, wait a minute, that number isn't right, it lowered to 30 million. Well, that number still isn't right. The U.S. Census says that the chronically uninsured represent maybe 2 to 2.5% unemployed people, about 8.2 million people, according to the Blue Cross study. The president promised that we won't have to ration health care, and they just came out with a study last week that the CBO says we probably will. The president promised that you can keep your health care coverage, but a month ago, business groups say it's too costly, and therefore, businesses which provide most of our health care are no longer going to do that. But let's look at some of the numbers. 1 out of 3 people, 33%, were offered health insurance through employment but refused it. 1 out of 5, 20%, are eligible but not enrolled. 1 out of 7 come from a family at 300% of the national poverty rate, which is about $65,000 for a family of 4. 10 million of those people make more than $75,000 a year but choose not to buy health care. The 8 million uninsured children, well, 73% of them are covered, through S-CHIP and Medicaid. 9.4 million, according to ABC News, were just simply between jobs and were only temporarily uninsured. 13.7 million were in that invincible category of 18 to 29-year-olds who think they're invincible. 6.6 million to as high as estimates of 12.6 to 20 million are non-citizens. Now, are we paying more in costs? Well, let's look at deductibles. In 1975, you paid 33%. In 2000, you paid 17%. In 2006, you paid 15%. Are we paying more on a national average? The answer is yes. But why? Well, the reason's simple. It's because we can. Everyone else in the world has government health care, where they're rationing their medical treatments and limiting what their governments can spend. So, of course, we're going to spend more. Now, if my mother's ill, I want the ability to spend every dime I can to save her life and to extend it. And I have no qualms with that. And the profit margin allows for innovation. Innovation is another reason other countries spend less on health care, because they don't have to. They rely on America to pay for medical innovation. It's the profitability that drives those innovations. Sure, they cost more, but what's the price for saving lives? Do you really want to be confronted by the next generation of avian flu or swine flu without American technology, American free enterprise to solve it? Now, drug costs. It costs $1 billion to develop drugs. Only 1 in 10 are viable products. It takes 10 years and reams of regulations to bring them to market. Now, people try to resolve this argument by saying, well, you know, the U.S.'s infant mortality is higher and their life expectancy is lower. Well, they can only say that because they're comparing apples to oranges. You see, infant mortality, we measure our statistics in birth, neonatal, and premature because we have the advanced science to save them. Other countries don't. They go through a certain gestation period, and if you don't get to that point, they don't count you. Life expectancy. John Stossel had a great program. You know, in America, we drive cars 10 times more than any other country in the world. If you take out the traffic accidents, you eliminate the statistics dealing with homicide rates, because America has a tendency to kill each other more, our life expectancy is actually higher. And America is actually a victim of its own success. Our success factors into our life expectancy and medical costs because we have an abundance of food production, meals that can feed 4 adults at the price of 1 meal. I mean, how many times have you been to a restaurant, ordered a meal, and had leftovers for 3 days? Only in America, believe me. Now, if you eliminate diseases caused by an abundance of food and the bad eating habits that we have, our life expectancy numbers go up sharply. And American success in technology extends and sustains lives of our elderly with new treatments and new drugs that other countries can't do. And that's the most expensive part of medical care. Let's take on this mythology by the media on the Arizona law, the immigration law. Now, unlike the Secretary for Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, and the Attorney General for the United States, I've actually read all 16 pages of the Arizona law. This Arizona law merely reinforces the national immigration policy. The amendment to it, passed by their House, actually prohibits racial profiling, and it's much less stringent than the federal law. The federal law requires that all immigrants carry documentation at all times because you can be asked to provide these papers. And if you don't have them, then you have to go back and prove that you're a legal immigrant. Arizona law only allows the police to stop you in terms of another violation, the process of another violation. Mexico's own immigration law, the Population Law, Article 67, allows anyone, not just the police, but anyone, to ask for documentation of suspected immigrants at any time. It does not limit racial profiling, and if you do not produce that documentation, you are deported immediately. Look, newspapers and the media have an obligation to give you, the readers, the truth. Not a filtered version of the truth, not a politically correct version of the truth, but simply the truth. And we're all human beings, and therefore, well, most journalists are. We will undoubtedly have our own interpretation of events, but that's what makes it so important to cover an issue in its entirety, because differing perceptions can easily color an issue. Let me give you an example. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson were out camping, and as they laid down to sleep, Holmes turned to Watson and he said, "Look up into the sky and tell me what you see." And Watson thought about it for a minute and he replied, "Well, I see millions and millions of stars." And Holmes said, "Well, what does that tell you?" And Watson looked up and he said, "Well, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Theologically, it tells me to create something as grand and beautiful as this, there must be a God. And God is great, and we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, it tells me since it's a beautiful, clear evening sky, it's going to be a beautiful day tomorrow." And Watson turned to Holmes and he said, "What does it tell you?" And Holmes looked up and he said, "Somebody stole our tent." So when I see newspapers and networks being advocates rather than being the purveyors of unbiased objective news, when I see them in a libelous and slanderous pursuit against people simply because philosophically they don't agree with them, I get mad. That's my job. And it's not a Republican thing, and it's not a Democrat thing. It's not even about interpreting events through some broad philosophical filter. It's simply delineating between right and wrong. It just so happens that Congress is almost always wrong. But believe me, I view myself as an equal opportunity offender. If I were to claim a party bias in my cartoons, I'd have to say I'm a member of the anti-stupid party. And my job is an exercise of common sense. You cannot draw a cartoon that you do not believe in or cannot substantiate. And you must be confident enough in your opinion, confident enough in your research to exclaim to the entire world, there are two sides to every issue. My side and the wrong side. But you know, with the internet, you have to make sure that your research is correct and that everything you do is perfect. I remember I was working on a cartoon. The issue was on whether or not the FAA should institute drug testing for pilots. And I dressed this pilot up as Hamlet. And he was holding a beaker and he was pondering, to pee or not to pee? That is the question. Well, I was inundated with cards and letters from pilots, and their chief complaint was pilots have 4 stripes, not 3. So. You know, as I watch the news, it's getting so ridiculous. You know, I was watching this whole thing because what we have now is we've got a politician as celebrity. And I remember when the Obamas were picking out a dog. It was like the biggest celebrity event. It reminded me of the story this White House Secret Service agent shared with me. He remembered the first time President Clinton brought in his dog for the first time into the White House. And the Secret Service agent asked him, "New dog, sir?" To which the president replied, "Yes, I got him for Hillary." And the Secret Service agent replied, "Well, that was a good trade, sir." Of course, that agent was reassigned to counting Chads in Florida. There are 3 types of editorial cartoonists today. There are those who merely illustrate current events. There are those who try to make humorous anecdotes about current events. And then there are those who try to make poignant statements with their cartoons to engage the reader in debate. Now, obviously, a good editorial cartoon will require being a combination of all 3. But the emphasis is on the latter part, making poignant statements. That's why we're on the editorial page and not the comic page. Now, humor is a very powerful weapon. I think it facilitates the ability to reach a much larger audience with your message, but it is the message that defines it. It is the message that makes it an editorial cartoon. An editorial cartoon without a message is merely a cartoon. My friend Steve Kelly of the Times-Picayune down in New Orleans had a perfect analogy for what a good, effective editorial cartoon ought to be. It's like taking that unrepresentative politician and kneeing him in the groin as hard as you can. You can't guarantee you'll change his tune, but you can guarantee he'll be singing a few octaves higher. And his wailing will be noticed by all, illuminating his performance. That's the bottom line. As editorial cartoonists, we want to illuminate their performance. We want you, the reader, to know what they're doing. We want the politician to know that we're watching. Now, with editorial cartoons, what I've found as years of being an editorial cartoonist, that we live in a political system that's relegated to being mostly reactive rather than proactive. So the editorial cartoonist takes on the role of the catalyst, the instigator, the protagonist, and the antagonist, luring the reader into the political process. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that we're going to change people's minds, but what we're trying to do is to inform the public, to take an issue to such an extreme that they will become aware, that they will react. We have a participatory democratic republic, the best system of governance in the world. Truly a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but only if you, the people, participate. Let me tell you another story. There was this duck. He waddled into the store and went up to the manager and said, "Got any grapes?" And the manager looked at the duck and he said, "No, I have no grapes." Duck went, "Oh," walked out. 10 minutes later, this duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" The manager looks at the duck and he goes, "No, we have no grapes." Duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" Manager goes, "What's wrong with you, duck? I have no grapes. I have no fruit section. I will never have grapes." Duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, says, "Got any grapes?" Manager goes, "I don't have grapes. I don't like grapes. I don't like ducks. Get out of my store." Duck walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in. The manager goes, "Hold it right there, duck. If you ask me for grapes one more time, I'm going to nail your little web feet to the floor. Ask me for anything else. Don't ask me for grapes." Duck looks at him and says, "Got any nails?" He says, "No." "Got any grapes?" You see, this joke provides a good working analogy of how I view Washington bureaucracies at work, because, you see, in Washington, D.C., things are not always represented as they truly are. For example, a 6.5% increase in Medicare payments is not called a rational effort to save Medicare. It's called a draconian cut. A balanced budget amendment which stipulates that Congress can only spend the amount of revenue they take in, something you and I do every day. That's not called common sense. It's called extremism. Making illegal immigration illegal is not called following the law, it's called insensitivity. Judging someone not by the content of their character, but strictly by the color of their skin, it's not called racism, it's called affirmative action. Aborting a human fetus in its third trimester is not called killing, it's called a choice. And we have a surplus, it doesn't mean that we've paid too much in taxes, it means we spent too little in services. And a tax is no longer a tax. It's called an investment in America. No, I think Vice President Biden said it's called patriotism. This battle our brave soldiers have undertaken against terrorists and Islamic extremism is no longer a war on terror. It's called an overseas contingency operation. Blowing up buildings is no longer called terrorism. It's called a man-caused disaster. Our National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism and Homeland Security, John Brennan, called jihad a legitimate tenet of Islam, arguing that the term jihadist should not be used to describe America's enemies. And the new national security strategy document drops the terms Islamic extremism from its lexicon. Frankly, I think this administration has been a man-caused disaster. And I don't know about you, but I believe in the old adage, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's usually a duck. My job as an editorial cartoonist is to nail that duck to the floor. Because someone needs to watch over the institution for the intellectually challenged, Congress, on behalf of the American public. You see, politicians often forget who they work for. Because of the pomp and circumstance that surrounds these career political celebrities, we're lulled into thinking it is we who work for them. It is the opposite. It is they who work for you. They are there to do your bidding. Absolutely. Now, I fear for the future because in all this deficit spending, they have not even thought about entitlements. See, government is not a solution. Social Security and Medicare are on an unsustainable path. The trustees predicted that Social Security Trust Fund will be exhausted by 2042. Medicare will run dry by 2026. But both of those predictions are based on very optimistic numbers, a growth of 4% of our GDP. And frankly, that hasn't happened in the last 3 years. Social Security, which is supposed to be a temporary and supplemental solution for families suffering from the Great Depression, has now turned into America's retirement system. And it returns a hefty 1% return on your investment if you get it back. And even that is no longer guaranteed. It will start to become unfunded not in 2014, but this year. See, the problem is we're putting a larger burden on our entitlement funds at the same time the pool of workers is rapidly shrinking. And the demographic shift, which will create significant problems for both programs, is happening now. The dynamic is because of falling birth rates, the ratio of workers paying into the system to recipients is in a free fall. And because this year, 30% of our baby boomers are coming to retirement age. Now, Medicare is already an unfunded liability of about $37 trillion. So don't just sit there. Go have babies. Teach them to work. Now, the good news is this can be fixed. The problems with this country can be fixed. The Constitution itself is a living document, but only in the sense that it can be amended if need be. The new problems that we face can be addressed, but the problems aren't going to be resolved by throwing money at them or creating another layer of bureaucracy or creating another government program to address it. The problem with this country isn't that we pay too little in taxes. It's that we support a government that has gotten too big and too intrusive. Here's an interesting statistic. According to the 1990 census, there's 17.7 million people that manufacture goods in this country. According to that same census, there are 18.8 million governmental workers in this country. That was 2 decades ago. We have more people that produce nothing but red tape than people that manufacture goods. I think that's an amazing statistic. And this weekend, the administration asked for $50 billion, additional $50 billion in emergency stimulus funds, on top of the $787 billion that created the mythical 2.5 million jobs amongst the 8 million jobs lost. The Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, thinks the rich are not paying enough taxes, and that is limiting job growth. Well, let me clue you in. Government does not create jobs. Government creates bureaucracy. The only sector of employment gains right now continues to be the government. Last month, we had a record 431,000 jobs created. Out of that number, 412,000 were temporary census workers. Only 4,000 were private sector jobs. Now, there's a finite amount of capital out there. You can invest it in the people, in American innovation, or you can fund the 13 governing bodies of our healthcare reform. Our country was built around the idea of self-governance. But you wouldn't know it from the numbers of people that turn out to vote. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do is to get involved. This is your country. Take it back. This is a nation founded on the principles of limited government, individual liberty, self-responsibility, and a strong national defense. These are all tenets that Ronald Reagan believed in, and they are good tenets for our country. Now, as an editorial cartoonist, I try to do my part. I take the issues, I push them to an extreme to draw the readers in the national debate and put the wheels of democracy in motion. I'm going to try to encourage you by showing you some cartoons. Oops. I'm also a capitalist pig, so buy my book. Ronald Reagan. Now, this is why I love my job. This is a picture of Bill Clinton looking over the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. If you read the copy, it says President Clinton looks at the binoculars, which still have the lens caps on. There's a clearer picture. But it's not just limited to the Democrats. I love my job. It's the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Aristotle. Bill Clinton followed up with, it depends on what the meaning of is. This is from the '94 Pulitzer collection. Aren't they supposed to face you when they bow? This is on U.S.-Japan trade. And in light of the modernization of society, we'd like to renegotiate the 10 Commandments down to 4.5. Our moral fabric. You know, when you think about it, editorial cartoons are sort of like advertising. The only difference is, with advertising, you're using an image to sell a product. With editorial cartoons, you're using an image to sell an idea. And the most succinct ones, those are the best editorial cartoons, the one that you get immediately. Father, you can't say prayers during graduation ceremonies, but if you print them on condoms, we'd be happy to distribute them. What I wanted to do on Father's Day, meet my father. Here's a black man with a black kid, a white man with a white kid. The black man's thinking white, the white man's thinking black. The kids are going, look, another kid. Skip that. It's the New York Governor Eliot Spitzer during his conference. It's hard to believe they'd let me run these cartoons. You can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. Abraham Lincoln. Hollywood. In ancient times, people worshiped the stars out of ignorance. Who would callously glamorize drugs and tobacco just for profit? Hollywood. Son, your father and I decided not to let you watch television anymore because it promotes violence. Touch my remote and I'll kill you. That was me as a small child. Michael Jackson holding the kid. This is what the kid was thinking. Michael Jackson's my father. Oh, please let go. Here's his sister Janet. Today on Martha Stewart Living, I'll be demonstrating how to cook your own goose. This is on whether or not television aided in the pursuit of justice in the O.J. Simpson case. Lady Justice beaten with the television. Katie Couric, I'm not just a reader of the news, pause next paragraph. A government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take it from you everything you have. Gerald Ford. Marlboro country. If you smoke, it's going to kill you. Skip this. Because of the soaring cost of medical malpractice insurance, we don't have any doctors left. However, rest assured, we have some of the best lawyers operating on you today. Don't ask, don't ask, don't ask. I think the appropriate question is, how could they let him run that cartoon? You ought to hear all the evil stuff that I don't publish. Cheap Saturday night specials. Our Goobinator, or I like to call him Goober for short. Can I call you back? Do cell phones distract us? Now, this is after the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against the Pledge of Allegiance. Bryce and Bobo the Clown was all booked up, so we got the next best thing. Are you really from the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? Viva bilingual education. And here to share his personal success story through bilingual education is Miguel. ¿Qué? Well, you have a slight temperature, we're not sure why, so we're going to have to amputate your legs. I think that's Dr. Kevorkian. Social Security, Medicare. Freeze, homicide, burglary, worse, trans fat. Raise your hands and step away from the chicken. It's wonderful how government thinks they should run our lives. Here's Barry Bonds trying to fill Babe Ruth's shoes, proving that steroids do not make you bigger. This is the border fence with the service entrance. Economics. The business of America is business. Calvin Coolidge. This is the way I feel on April 15th, pain through the nose. Wait a minute, I think I feel his wallet. You know, it's funny. I was reading the Constitution the other day, and the person that decides what date the elections are on is Congress. They can decide any date. I thought a good way to change the cosmetic look of Congress is to make elections on April 16th. Imagine how different our government would be. Saving Social Security. We'll skip through these. Day trading. We'll skip through here. Oops. Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it's a dangerous servant and a fearful master. George Washington. This is the Lincoln bedroom. Now, I've got to tell you, the Clinton years were some of my favorite years. Now, in '94, when I won the Pulitzer, I have to say, the president was very gracious, and she and her husband sent me a letter congratulating me. And so I gathered all my Clinton cartoons, and I wrote him a thank you note, and I sent it back. And I wrote a little note on it that said, I couldn't have done it without you. Which I thought was very funny until I got audited 4 months later. The stain. I did not have factual relations with the American people. Now this is Buddy at the vet, and Buddy's thinking, like, I'm the one who needs to be neutered? This is the Clinton Memorial with his pants around his ankles. I had to draw that at the right angle. This is the Clinton autobiography with pullout. I think that's Miss June. This is the U.S. Senate, Republicans at the feeding trough. Now, there's a debate of whether or not the Speaker ought to have her own plane. I needed to remind America that she had her own form of transportation. Jimmy Carter. You know, I don't think I saw that at the Carter Museum. That's anatomically correct, by the way. Elections. Nothing brings out the lower traits of human nature like office seeking. Here's the parting of the GOP with John McCain. This is Al Gore trying to give a speech at his convention. That's him in the background. Thank you for your answer, Senator Kerry. Kerry Sutra, The Many Positions of John Kerry. You know, I have to admit, I don't do anything creative. I'm really doing stenography. This is, the politicians are doing the heavy lifting. Is there anything in the wardrobe to make them look thinner? This is the lesson we should have learned from the last election. Ronald Reagan 1,000 times. Dennis Kucinich, of course I've seen a UFO. How do you think I got here? I think he should be president. He'd make my job so easy. My friend Fred Thompson, I announced my candidacy for the President of the United States. I quit. Obama's rhetoric and Obama's policies. Oh, let's get this. Now, I did this cartoon at the end of the last election, the prior presidential election. It's Hillary Clinton as the Wicked Witch of the East. And Obama's thrown 98 buckets of water on her, but she won't go away. World affairs. We're a nation that has a government, not the other way around, and that makes us special among the nations of the earth. Ronald Wilson Reagan. We can expect an extremely hostile response, heavy fire, and lots of resistance. Keep your head down and stick to your guns. What about our allies? Those are our allies. Remember Elian Gonzalez? Yes, Elian, someday all this will be yours. Is Russia reverting back to Soviet-style oppression? You're darn Putin. I'll skip through some of these. There's a mini-me, the axis of evil. Here. This is Iran, the proliferation of terrorism. This is the Intifada. I'm going to skip toward the end because, here we go, we're running out of time. This is the cartoon I did on September 11th. So sometimes you're just trying to capture the emotion of the event. I'm glad to say that the New York Fire Department made T-shirts out of this. They are just, it shows you the courage of Americans. This is the coordination of our intelligence services for 9/11. I'm going to skip to some newer cartoons and then we'll wrap up here. Well, I'll show you the Saddam one. This is the case against Saddam. Now, I was in Iraq. I went to Baghdad and to some of the forward operating bases with the USO to visit our troops. In each one of the big cities, they had a community swimming pool. They did not ever fill those with water. They used them to execute people. This is the type of individual we're dealing with. Is the world better off without Saddam Hussein? The answer is yes. We'll skip the Mata Hari. This is the 2008 Pulitzer collection. I have no idea what it is, but I feel strangely attracted to it. I looked the man in the eye. I was able to get a sense of his soul. This is Bush on Putin. You should have looked closer. He was wearing contacts that day. We'll skip through these, sure. Hillary Clinton, I pledged no more personal attacks on my drug-addicted, possibly Muslim opponent. The heroes from the California fires. The CBS anchor. You know, when I was promoting my book, I never did get that call from CBS. I don't know why. Here we go. This is Ahmadinejad addressing the United Nations on the coffin of an American soldier. Hugo Chavez collecting, striking hammers and sickles. Skip through these here, the ATM and the AMT. I love this cartoon. This is actually what Sheryl Crow said. Meet Sheryl Crow. She uses only 1 square of toilet paper per bathroom visit to fight global warming. And she's reaching her hand out to shake his hand. And he's just looking at it. Current affairs. Give me liberty or give me a government bailout. I'm okay, I landed on a taxpayer. Junior, it's time to take your Lipitor. Not now, Mom, I'm playing baseball. Skip through some of these here. Someday all this will be yours, the mountain of debt. This is Barack Spock. Live long and hand over your prosperity. I will have the most open and transparent administration ever. If you notice, all the pictures in the background are him. A young Barack Obama. All the answers to the questions are government, except for the one that says democracy is a form of social inequality. I was kind of hoping for a regular doctor. We have to pay for this health care bill somehow. No one should doubt our commitment in Afghanistan. As he stands next to the exit door. Social Security, and he pulls the parachute, and nothing comes out but IOUs. Aquaman, Flipper, and the cast of SpongeBob SquarePants were unavailable, but we did get director James Cameron. This is our debt washing up on the shores of Louisiana, and the little children are our grandchildren. Fourscore and 7 years ago, speak softly and carry a big stick. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Ask not what your country can do for you. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. So I know who's... seal of the president and an oil-covered eagle. We, the government. And Ronald Reagan. I know I'm keeping you guys a little long. Let me just do a quick wrap-up, and then I'll take some Q&A. On September 11th, a group of cowards attacked America. They tried to redefine what America is. Well, they died in vain. You see, America isn't just a structure of concrete and steel. It's built of stronger material. America is an idea. It lives in the hearts of all Americans. It lives in the minds of all Americans. It lives in the acts of courage displayed by firemen and policemen, heroes, Americans, racing up stairwells into the Twin Towers, into danger to save fellow Americans. It lives in the heroic acts of husbands, friends, wives, passengers of United Flight 93, heroes, Americans, putting themselves in peril to protect this great nation. It lives in the heroic acts of our military, our intelligence services, men and women, heroes, Americans, who will put their lives in harm's way to preserve our freedom and to save fellow Americans. There's a high price for freedom. The terrorists have said that they would die for their cause. What they don't realize is that Americans will die for their cause. The cause of liberty and justice will continue because America isn't just a towering edifice on our landscape. America is an idea. It is a cause. It is real and in each and every American, and no amount of explosives will bring it down. Now that the remnants of 9/11 have been cleared away, the rubble of the World Trade Center is gone. The Pentagon has been restored. The wounds have healed, and the scars that remain have only made us stronger. We mourn the recent past, but we're more appreciative of the present, and we look forward toward the future. As we inaugurate this new century, a century of invention, a century of innovation and amazing discoveries, of new threats and old, we embark upon a journey toward transforming the world into a brand new paradigm. A far more difficult task, transforming into a world of peace and prosperity. I'd like to challenge you to assist in this metamorphosis. I challenge you to appreciate your loved ones because time is fleeting and we only have them for a very short while. I challenge you to treat everyone with respect in the manner that you too want to be treated, although editorial cartoonists are exempted. I challenge you to have the courage to succeed, to be the best in whatever you endeavor to do, because that is the American way. I challenge you to have the courage to go on with your daily lives, but appreciate all the facets of life that truly enrich it and make this a better world. I challenge you to get involved, to guarantee the liberty and freedom that we often take for granted that so many have died to preserve. And America is a place where you can do this. America is a place where you have the freedom to succeed. America is a place where you can aspire to do anything, and you have the freedom and the opportunity to accomplish your dreams if you have the will, the courage, the dedication, and the desire to do it. You are only limited by the boundaries of your imagination. And America truly is a land where dreams come true. We've been challenged by the forces of evil. But it's not in the nature of America or Americans to run from adversity. Yes, Americans will risk their lives for a great cause, for the principles of liberty and justice for all, and the freedom and in the courage of our convictions, our nation will rise to the challenge, because that's the spirit of America. Let me tell you something. Our president is wrong. America is not just one country among many, many countries. America is not a nation of entitlement. America is a nation of achievement. America is a nation of exceptionalism. I love America. I'm not ashamed to say it, nor do I feel the need to apologize for it. I think you and I are lucky to be here, and most of the world wants to be where we are. This is our country. This is your republic. Take it back. God bless America. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
This on? There we go. Safe to say that we don't always get standing ovations at the end of the speech. That was well deserved, so
That's
thank
because
you.
we electrified all your chairs. I appreciate that. They got great engineers here.
So he's agreed to answer a couple of questions. We have staff members in the audience with microphones. We are filming this in the back of the room, so it's important you speak into the microphone so we can pick up your question. If you have a question, just raise your hand and a staff member will find you. Anyone? Come on. Oh, there we go. Over there, Deanna.
Oh, I thought we were all going to go to Arby's.
Hi. I would like your comment about the Islamofascists that are hijacking the great cartoonists and great minds in comedy by their threats.
Well, you know, it's always been a rule of mine to never take comedians very seriously. And, you know, I think it's sad that it seems to be one-sided in a lot of these environments. Comedy, I think, is one of them. And when you see the news show with Jon Stewart, I just don't take him that seriously. I think the comedy that we see on C-SPAN every day is far worse. Yes.
Right here, Deanna. You know what? I can get to it.
In the same vein, what went wrong with the cartoonist Conrad, and how did both of you work at the same newspaper?
You know, I had to wear Kevlar before I went into the building. Actually, Paul and I are good friends. In fact, you know, it's a strange story. Let me answer this in a roundabout way. I was the only person who did not apply for the job at the LA Times. It really was the biggest prize because it's the largest circulation daily paper with a cartoonist. And no one was more surprised than I was when they offered me the job. In fact, I recall in the first meeting that I had with the publisher and the editorial page editor, after the introductions, the first thing I said was, "I'm a capitalist, you guys are communists, this will never work." And I made them subscribe to my cartoons for a period to ensure that they knew where I stood, and they assured me that they would not try to limit my voice. And to their credit, the LA Times never did. They never limited what I had to say. Now about Paul and I are good friends. But I'll tell you a story. We went out to dinner, and there was a bunch of us, and Paul was backed up to a water fountain. And, of course, Paul's favorite subject is Paul. And to his credit, because he really was an icon of editorial cartooning, I think in the late 60s he was probably one of the best editorial cartoonists that ever lived, and Paul will tell you that. And so he turned to me after talking about himself for 20 minutes and said, "Ramirez, I have to go to the bathroom." And I said, "Paul, I've listened to you for 20 minutes. Why don't you just walk across the water?" Well, let's just say I'm indebted to Paul because I think he's one of the editorial cartoonists that knew what this business was about, and that's making dramatic statements with dramatic images, and he was a master at that.
Anyone else have a question?
How are you doing?
Good.
Good. I had a question about how do you get to young people? They're so inundated by pop culture these days, and we know the length of pop culture and where their focus is. There's so much, your cartoons about Hollywood and so on.
Well, you know, we hang out in the parking lot of Baskin Robbins and we kidnap them one by one. No, yeah, that's a very good question. And I think one good thing about the internet is it's a vehicle for those kinds of young minds. And I actually try to make the visual orientation of the cartoons something that I think they would look at. One great thing that I've heard about is a lot of history teachers and social science teachers using my cartoons to try to teach them about history. And hopefully, at the same time, they're taking in this propaganda, and it is taking root and will make them evil people just like me as they grow up. But I think that's very important for all of you to understand. It is our generations that will make this country great, the generations that follow us. And it's important to talk to them readdress what our constitutional principles and what the fundamental foundation of our country is. You know, I was watching a TV show the other day. They showed a copy of the Constitution, and in it there was a disclaimer that said, you know, these ideas were from 2 centuries ago. It doesn't necessarily reflect the values we hold today. They're wrong. The Constitution is the framework for America's greatness. And the young kids ought to know that. It's your duty to make sure they're educated in knowing what these foundational principles are and the sacrifices that were given to make this country a great country. Good question. Yes.
We have time for one last question right there.
You work with all these intelligent people. Why can't...
No, I work with journalists. I'm just kidding.
Why can't they get it right? Why can't they see the truth? Why will they not report it?
Matt Galgani, take down this gentleman's name. We do get it right in the pages of Investors Business Daily, and I do work with the most intelligent people around. The mainstream media, boy oh boy, you know, I just don't even know what to say about them. Every time I read an article in the New York Times or by AP, you're just not getting the truth. And you know, frankly, more and more of our meetings, our editorial meetings every morning, are discussing the relevant events that nobody's covering. Fortunately for you, there is a warehouse of information, and not all of it's true, so you have to be very careful and very discerning as you go through the news. But the news is out there, and you can find it. I think, frankly, as newspaper circulations drop, as alternatives like Fox News start to grow, I think the media is going to realize that their bread and butter is giving the American people the truth. And hopefully they're going to come around to that. And if not, IBD would be happy to take up all your subscriptions. Thank you for having me out. I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much. God bless you all.